And welcome back into the Sports Source. This segment of our program is brought to you by Madisonville Marine. And right now through June 13th, G3 is offering rebates of up to $1,500 back on select models carried at Madisonville Marine. $1,500 back on select models of G3 boats. In addition, Skeeter Boats offering rebates of up to $2,750 back on select models through June 10th. So incredible rebates now through June 10th, June 13th, depending on Skeeter or G3. Hurry down to Madisonville Marine while the options are still plentiful. Madisonville Marine. All right. The 2014-15 school year was a pretty good one for the Southeastern Conference. The league brought in a record, and that's a record for the SEC and a record for every other conference. Cash flow revenue, $455.8 million. The old record, well, I'll tell you what, let's go ahead and put up this graphic. I'll show you. The old record was the Big Ten last year at $338 million. So you just smashed that. Included in this, bowl revenue, television contracts for football and basketball and everything else, SEC championship game money, SEC men's basketball tournament money, NCAA championships that the SEC took part in, like the NCAA tournament, each of their teams that went, there's a chunk of that. And then, of course, the SEC network, which is what added the biggest chunk. The SEC handed out about $20.9 million per school last year. It jumped to an average of $31.2 per this year, so about a $10 million bump from the SEC network. Your thoughts on what that money does for the conference? Who stands to benefit the most? Is it a school like Tennessee, who's been fighting to build a reserve fund? Is it schools like Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Vandy, who have smaller budgets? Who wins in this thing?
Well, I think it's the teams that need, the schools that need to improve their financial situation, like at Tennessee. And we mentioned, and we're going to talk about it later, with Dave Hart and the reserve fund that they've got. But the thing is there's going to be more expenses for cost of attendance, and the ones that don't bring in the kind of revenue that the Alabamas and the Floridas and some of those schools do, I think there's more of a need. And the ones that need facilities, I think that's going to help them even more.
Yeah, I think it starts with the schools that are in more of a desperation spot, but I think you can also point to whatever position each school is in. Like Ole Miss, which is starting to become or appear more relevant in football, it allows them to give a big pay bump to Hugh Freeze in case somebody wants to come calling and bring him in. Dan Mullen, if somebody wants to take him away from Mississippi State. So depending on what the schools need, this can cover that.
Yeah. And Ole Miss is also, not only are they having to give out raises to Hugh Freeze, but that's another school, like Vince mentioned, that's building a basketball arena to finally get rid of the Tad Pad. Chuck.
Well, I mean, I think it's schools like Tennessee, because not only is this good for you, you need it. I mean, you're really counting on this, and then maybe even more. And it's also, think about the SEC football coaches. Their salaries are just going to go up even more because they're probably primarily responsible, their programs, for this being as high as it is.
I think one of the things that's interesting, though, is something that Vince touched on there, and that is you're going to have a lot of expenses with this, giving everybody a full cost of tuition. Some schools more than others. Tennessee, for example, has more money to give. Or I should say they're going to be giving their athletes more money than anybody else in the SEC, which means they're going to need more of this money, that they're going to use up some more of this money that's coming in just on those stipends. Your thoughts, John, on who benefits, and does it benefit Tennessee more than most?
Well, I do think it benefits Tennessee greatly, simply for the fact that the Volunteers are in a position where it has to close a gap. It has to close a gap in the reserve fund, just like other schools have to close a gap in terms of facilities. Georgia, which is not a school of need, so to speak, they're just now moving forward on an indoor practice facility. It's hard to believe that this is where they get on that trail. So I do think that when you look at the facilities across the conference, I think they're all in fine shape. I think mostly this money is going to go to what Vince was talking about, and that is the increased cost that is coming. Because when you make a lot of money, you can't help but try to avoid spending a lot of money.
One thing I want to show you, though, as good as that $31.2 million sounds, there you see it. Projected Big Ten schools, their revenue this year is projected right at $30.9 million. Big 12 schools, now they don't have a network, okay, so they can all sell their own Tier 3 rights. Well, Texas and Oklahoma, Texas got the Longhorn Network, that's $15 million a year on top of the $27 million the Big 12 gives you. So Texas is at $42 million. Oklahoma's at $33.5. They're making more than SEC schools. Does that change the way you view, everybody was celebrating the money, Does that change the way you view it when you look around and say, okay, it's really not the big advantage on at least two other conferences that you would initially think when you see $455 million going out? In the grand scheme of things, when Big 12 and Big 10 compared to it, it's not that big a difference.
I think it comes down to the landscape of your conference. That's who you're competing against, because before you take a look at the big picture, who you might be competing against for a national championship, you first have to succeed in the Southeastern Conference. So I think you start by looking at the other 13 schools, and then you broaden your landscape.
Yeah.
Well, it definitely puts it in perspective, and it makes it to where you think, wow, I mean, you can still do better, and you wonder how much those numbers are going to grow next year. Can they keep going up as much as they were?
Well,
the
and
past two?
the interesting thing on that is a lot of that's the SEC Network money, and right now they still don't have very many spots on the SEC Network. It's their 6 or 7 corporate partners, and then it's those same promos for the statues, so they don't have. There's not a lot of ad revenue. It's simply the cable and satellite agreements that are pouring that cash in. Once they start selling ads, and ESPN and the SEC Network have not released ratings yet, which will impact how much they're selling in terms of ads. But you do have to wonder, and that's a question for Greg Sankey, does the SEC Network stay here, or does it continue to grow, and how much does it grow?
Yeah, with these numbers, these financial numbers, I think with the competition, the national competition, we initially think all these SEC teams winning national championships, then Florida State and Ohio State win. But there's also the financial competition, and the Big Ten, I think, is starting to spend a little more on coaches. The Pac-12, this will challenge them to do that because the SEC has 10 coaches making $4 million per year.
I think the one thing that sticks out to me is if you are Ole Miss or Mississippi State with the smaller budgets now, it shows as a smaller budget, but they have a lot of their money comes from private boosters that pay into coaches' salaries and that kind of thing. Still, they don't have the budget of some of the other schools. This enables them to go out and compete with anybody in the Big 10 or the Big 12. You're at least in the ballpark, and that hasn't always been the case. Vince, I'll let you close it out.
I think what stands out is the significance of the jump from last year to this year, and the fact that the SEC is already pulling such a profit from the SEC network when it took the Big 10 5 years to pull a profit from their network. So if they have those similar types of jumps, then I think it can separate the SEC as a conference as opposed to individual schools.
That's another thing you give Slife credit for, because he went out and signed those 2 mega contracts that changed the dynamic with CBS and ESPN rather than start his own network like the Big Ten did. So he was able to look at it when they wanted their own network and say, all right, what's the best plan? It wasn't what the Big Ten tried. Let's go in a different way. And he partnered with ESPN. Boom. Again, I'm concerned about Mike Slive leaving. When we come back, the SEC basketball has once again tweaked its schedule. Every year, just pick one and stick to it, guys. Does it benefit Tennessee? We'll discuss. Come on back.
From East Tennessee to the Carolinas, no job is too big for Benedict Construction. Patios and decks, custom remodels, even custom homes. With a reputation for excellence, rely on the custom work of Benedict Construction.